must begin by thanking friends in Manthan, particularly my good friends Chandana Chakravarti and Ajay Gandhi, for this invitation. I'm honored to be here. I recognize several people in the audience, friends, very senior scholars, public intellectuals, and it is my privilege to speak today in front of you. What I thought I might do today is not really to present a Bill of Rights, but to pose the Bill of Rights as a question that we need to think about in contemporary India. The title that I had given for my talk was Stree Purush Tulana, or a Bill of Rights for Women. Stree Purush Tulana is a tract, a pamphlet really, that was written in 1882 by Tarabai Shinde, who was a well-known anti-caste philosopher, in protest against the conviction of a child widow on charges of murdering her infant baby. What was the penalty, Tarabai asked, for the women, for the men of her family who were responsible for sexually assaulting her? Was there a penalty? Was there a recognition of their guilt? And what justice is a conviction of a child widow who has been incarcerated in her home? For a long time, we like to believe that this is history. That was 1882. This is 2014. We are in a different era, at a different time, and we assume that we have a very different sensibility of justice in our times today. And that is part of what I want to talk about. A Bill of Rights is something that is all-encompassing. It looks at questions of discrimination in possibly every single field of social, political, and personal life. But this is also the 2nd of October, and I will focus on one aspect of women's predicament in India today that was also women's predicament when Tarabai was writing in 1882. At the time that Tarabai was writing, we also heard many stories about women, not the women who were burnt on the pyres of their husbands, but about women who resisted sati. Although the number that escaped was not very high, we have no account of how many of those women who were sent to the pyre actually resisted. How many of them were forced? We will never know. But there are histories of indentureship in the Caribbean, for instance, that point to the fact that a large number of women of high caste who had been widowed escaped oppressive families to get onto ships and sail to unknown lands and unknown futures, rather than be imprisoned within oppressive families. The number of single women who got onto those ships was extremely high. So women resisted, even in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, one way or another. Begum Rokeya dreamt of a feminist paradise in Sultana's dream. This was also at that time. The stunning woman who founded the institute I now head, of which Dr. Bhargav is the chairman, Dr. Durgabai Deshmukh, repudiated child marriage in order to join Gandhi's non-cooperation struggle. She was his official translator in Andhra. She said that serving the nation was more important to her than serving one man. She bore no malice to her husband and freed him to remarry. And when the task of independence was accomplished, and she was a member of the Constituent Assembly, she married Dr. C.D. Deshmukh, then the finance minister of the newly independent India, a marriage between equals, and went on to set up a network of hospitals and colleges for women. Or the story of an aunt of my father's, who I knew very well, who was widowed at the age of 10. Her brothers tried to force her to tonsure her head. She asked for a few cents of land so that she would not need to stand at their door every month for the barber's payment. The demand for tonsure was withdrawn, and she got to keep her head full of hair. The second wave of the feminist movement, as we call it today, is now almost 4 decades old. The stories that I have told now are of a different time. We have secured many protections for women and a few rights which are observed in the breach, like the women's right to property. But protections, importantly, are against gruesome, unimaginable violence. Women murdered by their own families, consigned to mental asylums, subjected to gruesome rape and sexual assault. Were these only poor women? No. The largest number of dowry murders were of middle-class, upper-caste women who were locked into violent families with no escape and no space in their parental homes in the 1970s and 1980s. We speak rather glibly today about the misuse of anti-dowry legislation. But in sheer terms of scale, the number of women dead or suffering grievous hurt far exceeds the anecdotal instances of misuse. Apart from being a sociologist, I have been a case counselor. The numbers of well-educated women, doctors, journalists, professionals of every kind, abused in the worst terms by husbands who were also doctors, lawyers, teachers, and professionals is astounding. But unlike the Jahajis of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, women are just not taking the ship to sail out of an abusive situation. Why? With domestic violence, the question is always, what is the threshold? When is it bad enough to be named violence, enough to attract the strong arm of law? Let's forget the law for a moment. In a conjugal relationship, the smallest violence, the slap, is violence because it bears the stamp of contempt and authority. Most importantly, it speaks of disrespect and the loss of dignity. And that is something we must understand. Violence in India today against women is an upward spiral. We thought we had made some gains in the matter of sexual assault in the 1980s especially, and starting from the late 1970s to the 1980s, after the campaigns against the rapes in police custody of Ramiza B in Hyderabad and Mathura in Maharashtra, both 16-year-old working-class girls, one Muslim, the other Adivasi. And then the assault on Sikh women as part of a pogrom in Delhi after the assassination of Indira Gandhi in 1984. And then we saw more, and the one that shook us up was the rape and murder of Thangjam Manorama by the personnel of the Assam Rifles in Manipur in 2004, and the sexual assaults and murders in Gujarat in 2002. Why did this shake us up? The level of brutality, again, was unimaginable. But with the Manipur case especially, it was because a large group of ordinary women, the Myra Paibis, stripped naked in front of the army headquarters in Kangla, shouting, "Indian Army, come and rape us." Can we even begin to understand that the anger and humiliation of living in the fear of rape forces women to resist in unimaginable ways? And then again, the December 2012 incident in Delhi. Yet again, we thought we had sorted it out. I was part of the hearing held by Justice Verma in drafting the new law. We thought we had a law that had fixed it finally. But it happens again in Shakti Mills in Bombay and then in Badayung in the UP. Is it only poor women who are subjected to the humiliation of sexual assault and molestation? No. Senior editors, judges, ministers, officers, trainee officers, it is a continuum from an attitude to conduct. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi insisted that one must disagree and engage in non-cooperation without bearing malice or hatred or negativity of thought and feeling, because it is that negativity that contains the seeds of violence and may erupt at any time against anybody. But it is also about power and the consolidation of that power through the subjugation of women. We have barely any judges in the high courts and the Supreme Court. Equally sorry figures for women in politics. And the glass ceiling is alive and in place. In the face of this adversity, women have resisted and have insisted on dignity. It has often been a losing battle, but resistance there has been. What I'm saying today that is different, I'm often faced with the question of, is what I'm saying today different from what I said when I entered the feminist movement as an 18-year-old? And the doubt creeps in. Have we made a difference? It is a doubt that is ever present in our minds. When KPS Gill, the Lion of Punjab, was charged with molesting a senior IAS officer and she had him convicted, a senior journalist of a national newspaper moaned that Gill's signal service in wiping out terrorism should not be brushed aside because of this simple incident. Because after all, and I quote, "Women have finely tuned mechanisms to cope with importunate intrusions on the female body," unquote. These were his words, and I have never forgotten them. What are these mechanisms? What is this fine-tuning? What are these importunate intrusions, to use the journalist's words? What is the cost to human dignity for women who must cultivate these mechanisms instead of moving ahead with life with a feeling of security and freedom? What does this routine, everyday life of violence do to women? More than women, to our girls. Oh no, it's not only the poor girls in government schools who are vulnerable. I have personal accounts of 2 upmarket schools in this city. One where girls came up to my team after a gender session and asked whether kicking was sexual harassment. Why? Because a gang of boys, their classmates and seniors, regularly accosted them in the school and kicked them on their bottom. And the school authorities looked the other way because the boys were from big families and they were boys. In another school, when a boy threatened to spike a drink if the girl did not go out with him, she was terrified. Her parents had no option but to move their daughter to another school because the principal refused to act. We hear murmurs against the RTE in private schools. We don't realize the threat is within. Our girls are unsafe, even in these upmarket schools. In these days, we have been hearing a lot about love jihads and khap panchayats. Way back at the beginning of this century, we had philosophers like Periyar and Ambedkar arguing forcefully in favor of choice marriages as the only way to break the caste system and break the ingrained sense of inequality and discrimination in people's minds. But of course, we have a politics that nurtures khap panchayats and love jihads, whatever that term means. But we must remember that all of these forms of violent vigilantism are directed as much to people of another group as they are directed to women of our own. At the side of this violence, it is women who die on both sides. The khap panchayat enforces norms against intercaste marriage. It also enforces control over intracaste marriage. So it is both women of your own caste and women of another caste who will die for whatever men feel is their honor. We forget, of course, in this time and this day and this age, that honor must rest with the individual. How can your honor as a man rest on my life? My honor rests with me, yours rests with you. There is that simple fact about the location of rights and the location of freedom that we have simply forgotten today. Why am I going back and forth talking about the 19th and 20th century, early 20th century, and our present time? We know that child marriage was a big problem in the late 19th and early 20th century. We had large debates on the age of consent. We had large social movements that were engaged in raising the age of consent from 9 to 10 to 11 to 12 to 15. Each time the bar was raised, it was a struggle. We thought we had fixed it. But if you look at the National Family and Health Survey of 2006, what you find is that in Andhra Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh is fourth in the list, we actually witness a drop in the female age at marriage from 18 to 16. This points to something else. It is not that we have not been able to fix the problem of child marriage. It is not that we have not been able to address effectively the problem of virulent violence against women. What we are witnessing is a resurgent conservatism. What we are witnessing is a return to tradition dictated by men and communities. What we are witnessing is a re-enslavement of women in the name, again, of honor, of tradition, of culture. How are forces of the new order, whether they are economic forces or they are political forces or they are social forces, how are these forces complicit in this re-enslavement of women? And I think this is a very hard question that confronts us today. As mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and friends, how are we, each one of us, complicit in this violence? And what can we do to resist and to build a better world? Savitribai Phule spoke in 1882 about a comparison between men and women. Justice Verma, at the end of his report, proposed a Bill of Rights for women. Ambedkar said that no change can come about without a change in people's minds. He also spoke importantly about constitutional morality, about the fact that in the constitutional era, no matter what you think, no matter what your personal belief is, in relation to another person, it is constitutional morality that will prevail and not public morality. Whether in relation to your wife at home, or in relation to the person on the street, or in relation to people that you work with, it is constitutional morality that must prevail. Individuals have rights under the Constitution, and those are supreme, and supreme even over the cultures of public morality. And that is what I would actually like to end with. Whether we like it or not, change in accordance with the fundamental principles of human dignity and freedom must be non-negotiable. Otherwise, there is simply no way forward. And I leave you with this thought. Violence and harassment of this kind is dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing for women and the victims, certainly, but it is also dehumanizing for men. Thank you.
ये तो आने ना भाई वहाँ पर गए बाद में काम करना।
We open this talk for discussion. There would be roving mics going around. Please raise your hand, and may I remind you, please keep your questions short and direct. I can see a hand right at the back. Yes, please go ahead.
I would like to ask a question. Like Bollywood movies, TV, commercials, we are objectifying women. So people are like children from the childhood, they are taking granted that women are objects. So anybody fighting on this or anything to do with this?
Well, thank you for that question. Every time I have spoken about violence against women, the first question has always been about the media, which means that what we see in the media is extremely troubling, and it is something that is actually perpetuating very negative stereotypes of women. And I think that there has to be a resistance. I mean, it is the resistance to media, the resistance to that portrayal of women that we find objectionable has to come from the viewers. As viewers, how are we going to actually set the non-negotiables in relation to viewing the kind of absolute violent rubbish that we see in the media? Because we can't forget that there is the backing that the media has in terms of political power and in terms of media space. It is a power. But how are we going to actually counteract that power? How are we going to build a culture outside of that media space that rejects the cultures that the media is trying to hand out? I think that is the challenge.
Please.
Excuse me.
Hello.
I would like to ask you, voice is coming?
Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Kalpana,
I can
you-
hear you. Whether you are hearing
No,
or not.
we have a speaker here. One sec. Yes, please go on. Yeah, can you give your
I
name,
just-
please? Please announce your name.
I am Bharat Bhushan, retired Chief Commercial Manager from Railways, IRTS officer. I just wanted to know about some elaboration on the Matama, Matangi, Basavi, Ellamma, Devadasi, Jogini, this system. despite of all educated people here, I have been seeing in combined state of Andhra Pradesh, 42,000 people of Matamas are there. In Karnataka, 52,000 people are there. It's very shame for our purpose. Still people are being used for the God's wife is being used for in the name of a very inferior, indignified, the prostitution work. Nothing, I'm not able to see any media, any press talking over the years. We have been raising this bogey for the last 15 years in very, very many forums. But you have to understand how stigma people are facing. I can quote one example of Vijay Kumar, who has done MBA. He was asked by a person, who is your father?
Sir, we got your question.
Okay, please.
Well, the part that I left out of my talk because I thought it might get too complicated was to address the question of intersectionality. And I will do that without recourse to jargon and very simply in a minute. When we look at the discrimination that women face, I think there is a universal aspect to that discrimination that women across caste, class, community face. But there is also a specific aspect to that discrimination, which are specific to their social location. Do they belong to a minority community? Do they belong to an upper caste? Do they belong to a Dalit community? Do they belong to an Adivasi community? Women face discrimination along multiple axes. And with Dalit women, the problem is actually compounded by the fact that they are subjugated both on grounds of gender and on grounds of caste. And it is through the medium of caste that gender subjugation takes place. I agree with you that forced prostitution and the forced dedication of women is something that ought to have gone a long time ago. And we have had sterling reformers in this state who have actually focused on that one issue alone. We have legislations that are supposed to address these issues. I don't think we must rely completely on the media in order to provide a common sense in order to abolish something like the Devadasi system. What we can do is invite the media to share in our social critique and hope that they will join us in that social critique. But there has to be a wide-ranging social critique and a rejection of forms of oppression as and when we see them. But of course, the fight is much larger. And here, I would again like to invoke Ambedkar. One of the things that he says quite unequivocally is that the caste system is premised on forms of violence against women. If you remove the subjugation of women from the caste system will collapse. And his platform for anti-caste philosophy spoke about the annihilation of caste. We might see it as a mere slogan, but really, to me, there isn't another solution. Because all these forms of violence tied to culture are located firmly within the ideology of caste. And unless we treat the question of the subjugation of women as political, unless we treat caste discrimination and subjugation on the basis of caste as political, we would not have even begun to address the problem. So it really lies in the annihilation of caste.
I saw two hands go up.
Madam,
the lady
here.
at the back. First the lady at the back, and then we'll take your question. Yes. Please go on.
Kalpana, you mentioned the Bill of Rights. Today, just, on a simple operational level, there's a girl in college, you talked about that. we take public transportation, whatever. What is the most simple recourse? If I am exposed to some sort of abuse, what are the most simple things that I have recourse for? It's not clear as, can I go to the nearest police station? What do I report?
Well, if you have been subjected to abuse, you go to the nearest police station, you insist that your complaint is registered, and you insist that there is a proper investigation. The Bill of Rights, in fact, although it was not opened out and proposed in any great detail, is something that we already have in place. We have fundamental rights under the Constitution. We have special legislations that are linked to those fundamental rights that provide protections in each and every sector, including assault by unknown persons on the street or in some unknown place. So yes, the first thing is that if you are subjected to abuse on the way to college, in college, on the street, at home, you have to report that abuse. The problem with the violence that women face is that violence is not reported. But an even more basic problem is that violence very often is not even named as violence. Is abuse violence? At what level should abuse happen for it to be actually named as violence and for the policeman sitting in that police station to take note of the complaint? But I think what we need is an extremely aware citizenry. We need to know, what do we do when we go to that police station? What do we ask for? And if that is not done, where do we go and what is that recourse? We cannot, in our time, afford an ignorance of law and procedure. That is something that we have to know and that we have to take recourse to it, whether we believe that the law is effective or not. I think these are two larger, very different questions. Is the law effective? Is a philosophical, moral, statistical question. What do I do when I'm subjected to abuse is an existential question. When I'm subjected to abuse, I report it, and I name it as abuse and as violence.
One gentleman there, please give your name.
I am Panduranga Reddy. Madam, see, there is no problem with the feminism movement, and a feminist like you, listening to you, like all other feminists, there is a strong bias against men. I mean, impression is made that the whole problem is created by the men. If you look at dispassionately and objectively, is not a mother, a sister-in-law, a mother who insists on dowry, a sister-in-law with her envy or jealousy, her behavior towards her sister-in-law.
Yeah, we got your question.
Yeah,
isn't the woman
so
responsible?
the woman is basically an enemy of another woman, be it a colleague in the office, the jealousy, the anger. These are traits, whether between men or women.
We got your question.
Well, I am not biased against men, although it seems to you that I am. I have always lived in a family of very strong men who had very strong voices, and I had to deal with it. So my voice had to be stronger in some parts. But, and I won't accuse you of bias against women either. But my basic question has always been this. If the mother-in-law and the sister-in-law have been complicit, which they might well be, because what I stated quite clearly is we are not talking about individuals, we are talking about ideologies and about political frameworks within which people are located, and the family is located within that ideological and political framework. But there is a very simple question that I have always asked every time I'm faced with a question like this. given that women are biased and ignorant and jealous and vindictive, there is a general inborn, innate character trait in women. Given that, is not a course open to the good husband to strike a different path? Why does the good husband have to follow these jealous, vindictive women? That is my answer.
Okay. Hello.
I have a question.
We'll take the last two questions. One very quick question from here, and after that,
Hello.
Mr. Bawa. Yes, quick question.
Okay.
Hello.
And we have some coherence here. I'm Professor Satya Kiran. I'm here, Kalpana. Here. One of the major concerns that
We can't hear you. Take the mic close.
one of the major concerns that we are facing today, and a concern that is not expressed in the media, is the politicization of the media. I'll give you one case in point. About a month back, an actress was named and shamed by the media, whereas the perpetrators were let go off. That's a major concern. For the vitality of democracy, you need a media that is free and fair and that can raise voices that are unheard. What's your take on this?
Sure.
Yes.
We have a lot of friends in the media, I dare say. I have one sitting right here in the audience, who are free and fair and proud fathers of vocal daughters. But of course, there are those that don't report. But I think Deepika Padukone did good. I think that in speaking up and in speaking out, she did a good thing. She was in fact, when I was talking about the fact that we're not only talking about the downtrodden poor, because the reason why I'm saying that is because it is easy for us to distance ourselves from a social predicament that is not ours. So it's important in the case of violence not to distance ourselves from people who we see as archetypal victims of violence. So people like these people in cinema or in media, certainly that is the tip of the iceberg. It is a shame that the media did behave in the way that it did, but I do think that there is a positive aspect to that, because there is a very strong sense in which that was not taken lying down, that there was an immediate resistance to it. So we do find our voices from the most unexpected quarters, which is why I think that in speaking about violence, while it is important to remember, one must never forget, like Milan Kundera was fond of saying, one must never forget. But it is also important to remember that there has always been resistance. The resistance is never heard because it's in smaller pockets, it's in smaller numbers, it's not strident, it doesn't have the attention of the public domain. But resistance there has been, and that is what will ultimately push us in fits and starts towards the idea of justice.
May we take the last, I'm sorry, we'll have to take the last question from Mr.
Okay.
Vasant Bawa. I'm sorry, we are running out of time. We can't hear you.
What struck me a few weeks ago when the number of alleged rapes took place in UP, that when the Chief Minister and the former Chief Minister Mulayam Singh Yadav defended, well, I wouldn't say defended, but attacked the public image of women as represented in films and media and the newspapers and so on, he was shouted down. In other words, the liberal, quote unquote, liberal elite believes that it is more important to defend the freedom of the press or the freedom of opinion than the rights of women in that context. Now, maybe something more relevant to Yogendra Yadav's discussion, but I think it's relevant here also.
Yes. No, it is certainly relevant, and I think that this is, more and more, I feel that really the media are on trial in taking public stands, particularly in relation to violence against women? Are they going to remain trapped in the webs of public morality, or are educated and enlightened sections of the media actually going to step out and fearlessly take a stand en masse in defense of women's basic right to human dignity? This is a test. And if at every forum you go, the first and the last question you face when you talk about violence is what is going to happen with a media like this, I really think that it is time for the media to put itself through this test. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalpana.
One last question, ma'am. And one last question here. Ma'am.
I'm sorry, we are running out of time.
I think Professor can take my last question. Please.
We can't see you. Can you stand up?
Can we envision a world where woman gets empowered and educated? And if the world were to be ruled by women, would it be a better place?
Well, I think women are educated to a reasonably significant extent. Women are also empowered, but they are obstructed from taking control of their own lives. So if empowerment is, the first step in empowerment is taking control over your own life, there is an obstruction. But I do think that we need to move those obstacles. I do think we need to move ahead. Do I want a world ruled by women? It may be a better place, but no. I think men must learn to share power, to share democratic values, and to step back while having women standing there beside them. It is not a solution to push women out and have women standing there. It is a solution for men to school themselves into stepping back when they see a woman standing beside them and give her the space and the power and the control that she needs. Thank you.